Hey, so it's been a while since I've last covered Lost Paleo media, and since then I've been suggested and come across several more examples of dinosaur-related lost media. Let's take a look at some of these examples. Our first example is one that we don't really see that often, at least I haven't seen very often, and that's lost dinosaur literature. The one example I found was an ebook called Cruel Eden, which was written by Tim Haines, the very man who's responsible for other dinosaur-related works like the Walking With series, Primeval, and the upcoming Surviving Earth documentary. On April 3rd, 2018, UK television production company Impossible Pictures posted this image on their Twitter page with the caption, "Cruel Eden by Tim Haines, a sequel to Arthur Conan Doyle's The Lost World, available for pre-order now on Amazon Kindle, releasing April 12th, 2018. Later that same month, on April 12th, Impossible Pictures made another post, stating the book was now available on Amazon Kindle. However, when you click on these links, they all lead to dead pages, and trying to look around the internet for information regarding this book hasn't led me far. However, taking these links and putting them on the Wayback Machine does take us to the book's original Amazon page, which gives off simple details including a synopsis for the story. According to the description, it is 1916 and two British soldiers slump into the bottom of a German trench, exhausted by their charge across no man's land. Far from being allowed to rest, they are joined by a manic Captain Edward Malone, determined to drag them further into the German lines on what he calls a monster hunt. Malone is about to discover the terrible legacy his past has unleashed. Best-selling author and creator of Walking with Dinosaurs, Tim Haines conjures up an epic tale of man versus nature, picking up from where Conan Doyle left his story, The Lost World, in 1912. Ranging from the brutal wastelands of the Western Front to the dark mysteries of the Amazonian rainforest, Cruel Eden tells the story of two characters, Thomas Challenger and Millie Summerlee, as they follow in their parents' footsteps and discover the unforeseen legacy of the first expedition to the Lost Plateau. In doing so, they discover there is something more lethal than guns and bombs, more terrifying than carnivorous dinosaurs, and that is a dangerous idea. Along with that, the site also reveals the book has 351 pages, and has at least one customer review from the UK, which reads, "A sequel to Arthur Conan Doyle's Lost World, the author has thought about what would come after the discovery of dinosaurs on the plateau in 1912. I would say it is a must-read for any of the fans of the original novel, and I found Cruel Eden was in keeping with the gentleman adventurer spirit of The Lost World, but with a distinctly modern voice. A really fun and action-packed plot with some great characterization and even some comedy. I just hope it gets made into a film one day." Aside from this, I really wasn't able to find out much more on this book. There doesn't seem to be any other site that mentions it besides a few posts on Twitter, and based on the response of these posts, it seems I'm not the only one who's wondering what happened to this book. Was it a UK exclusive? Was it just a limited digital release? Did it even ever really get fully released? If so, why isn't it talked about more? And who was that one reviewer that got a chance to read the book? I would assume even if it had a small following in the dinosaur community, surely there'd be more posts about it at least. I would also question whether or not copyright had a role in this, but considering Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's book is in public domain, that shouldn't be a reason why the book wasn't released. Unless, of course, maybe there's something I'm missing. Maybe it was a belated April Fool's joke. Man, imagine if that was the case. Low-key, that would be kinda funny. And, you know, a bit cruel, but hey, at least it would be living up to its name, you know, Cruel Eden. No, not funny? Alright, whatever. So for our next topic, it's a rather strange one that I've actually already talked about on my second channel. So let me explain. A little while back, I covered the Paleontology Fringe Theories iceberg made by Reddit user Sustained Disgust. That was actually the second version of the iceberg that this user made. In the original version of the iceberg, there were topics that were included that would get cut for the second version. I would actually end up going back and discussing these cut topics in a separate bonus video in my iceberg series. But one topic that, to this day, I haven't found any information on was this entry titled, "Dinosaurs Telekinetically Guided the Meteor Suicide Theory." With an idea as crazy as that, it. I just had to know more, and I really just couldn't find anything about it on the internet. I actually contacted Sustained Disgust themselves at one point to see if they had any recollection as to where they got this theory from, and while I no longer have their response on hand, I remember him confirming that they got it from a paperback book talking about UFOs and pseudoscientific ideas in the same vein as John Keel and Brad Steiger, but unfortunately they didn't remember the name or the author, and at the time they responded to me, they weren't able to find the book. I know that doesn't really narrow things down all that well, but I ended up making a video on my second channel about it in the hopes of maybe getting just a bit more attention on the topic, but that didn't really go anywhere, so I figured it would fit perfectly for this video here on my main channel. I really just want to know more about this entry. You can't just say dinosaurs telekinetically guided the meteor to off themselves and not give any context on it. And yeah, the entry could very well be a brief mention, or even just a joke in this book, but I don't care. I'm still curious to know the full context, and I appreciate anyone who's willing to give that information. So if this idea at all rings a bell, if you have this book, have access to this book, or maybe know somebody that might have access to a book like this, you would be doing me a huge favor, I guess, in finding out. I don't know, probably not even worth your time, but I'm curious, okay? Anyways, definitely leave a comment down below if you know. Moving on to the topic of lost dinosaur movies, there's not a whole lot of examples of completely lost dinosaur films outside of the silent film era, which if you want to know more about examples regarding that topic, I actually have a whole video on it that I definitely recommend. However, there are plenty of small-scaled examples of lost media from dinosaur films like lost scenes. For instance, there's actually some from Gertie the Dinosaur, a 1914 film cartoon made by artist and vaudeville performer Winsor McCay. I actually did a whole video last week talking about Gertie and her not-so-well-known knockoff film with the same name from 1915. If you haven't seen that video yet, I highly recommend that you do. It's an interesting topic. As I was researching for this video, I learned that Gertie actually has some of her own lost media. For example, many sources state that McCay had made a total of 10,000 pages of drawings for his Gertie film, and typically after his work was eventually published and released, McCay would request to have his drawings returned to him, likely for the sake of preservation. Well, unfortunately, his collection of original drawings and prints would suffer a couple of fires. One fire happened after his death when his wife moved into a new living space in New York. Luckily, his collection wasn't hit that hard, but later on, some of McCay's film reels were put in a storage vault, and because nitrate material is very flammable, eventually this collection caught on fire too, destroying more of McCay's materials. On top of that, after McCay's death, his family weren't the most responsible with the money he had left for them, and when things eventually got tough financially, they ended up selling off some of his works for cash. Out of the 10,000 drawings McCay had made for the Gertie movie, only 400 survived today, which are thanks to the efforts of another animator, Robert Brotherton, who stated in John Canemaker's book, Winsor McCay, His Life and Art, that he had found the drawings in one of his colleagues' fabric shop and was allowed to take them. He would take care of them for the next almost 3 decades, with the exception of a few instances where he would sell some of them to private collectors, or donate a few more to museums. What's interesting about these surviving stills is that one of them actually revealed an ending to the Gertie movie that is now lost. It's a very simple and brief scene of Gertie taking one last bow for the audience. But according to Canemaker's book, this ending isn't shown on any prints of the film that are around today. In the final section of the film, now lost, surviving animation drawings show that Gertie, ham actress as she was, returned alone for yet another bow to the audience. And the only surviving piece of evidence of this ending is the single drawing of Gertie taking her final bow. It's never explained what could have happened to this lost ending, but I have a theory. Like I mentioned earlier, McCay was a vaudeville performer, and when he eventually got into animation, he would integrate his animated films into his performances that he would play out in real time in front of a live audience, and Gertie was one of those films. Well, when his stuff started to gain a lot of attention, especially with Gertie, associates from a movie distributing company called Box Office Attractions offered the artist a deal to re-release an extended version of the movie with live-action sequences. McCay agreed, and that extended version was made, featuring McCay himself and a group of his colleagues, one of whom makes a bet with him saying that he wouldn't be able to bring a dinosaurus to life using drawings. The live-action sequences make up both the beginning and the end of the film. meaning Gertie taking a final bow was probably cut for this version so that it would flow better with the ending, and the only times this ending was revealed was likely during McKay's vaudeville performances. Of course, that's just a guess. This box office attraction version is the only version of the film that, to my knowledge, exists. None of McKay's vaudeville acts were recorded, so I can't say for sure if this was the case. Again, just a theory. A cringe theory. Okay, I've talked about Gertie enough. In this next example, we have an interesting case of lost paleo media that actually ended up being found. Kind of. The example I'm referring to are some of the once lost stop motion sequences to 1994's Dinosaur Island. For those of you that don't know, 1994's Dinosaur Island is a Roger Corman produced cavewoman flick that reuses a lot of props from Corman's Carnosaur film that had been released just a year prior. I actually talked about this in my Carnosaur retrospective videos, but I figured it fits perfectly for this video's topic. I won't go into too much detail, but basically, when Corman realized the dinosaur hype wasn't dying down after the release of Jurassic Park, he had a couple colleagues of his, directors Fred Olen Ray and Jim Wynorski, make another dinosaur movie reusing several props and assets from his Carnosaur film. However, when stop-motion animator Hal Miles, who had worked with Ray on a previous film from 1990 called The Alien Within, caught wind of this new dinosaur movie being made, he suggested to Ray to use his dinosaur models that he made for a separate project called Dinosaur Zoo. Ray saw this as a good opportunity to save money and had Miles create several stop-motion sequences with said models that were later composited into the film. This included scenes with a Triceratops attacking the soldiers on the island, a Brontosaurus eating some vegetation, a pterodactyl on a rock preening itself, and a Tylosaurus attacking the soldiers on the beach. But there was one problem. Corman doesn't like stop motion, and wanted certain scenes with Miles' dinosaurs to be replaced with Carnosaur props instead. This included certain close-up shots of the pterodactyl preening itself being replaced with a puppet, and the entirety of the Tylosaurus attacking the soldiers on the beach sequence to be replaced with a Deinonychus hand puppet, along with a random close-up shot of the Brontosaurus being cut for some inexplicable reason. As far as to why the other segments were cut, I imagine it was because Corman wanted to utilize his Carnosaur props and get as much money as he could out of them. But that's just a guess. It was never fully explained why these scenes were cut. From my understanding, these stop-motion scenes weren't available to the public for years, much to Ray's and Miles' disappointment. Apparently, Ray attempted to talk to Corman into re-releasing the movie with the original stop-motion scenes restored, but this never happened. It wasn't until Shout Factory obtained the rights to some of Corman's library of films, including Dinosaur Island, when Ray was finally allowed to properly reveal the scenes to the public in a special feature segment in the film's first ever DVD release. I'll admit, whether or not the scenes had been released prior to this point in time, I have no idea. I haven't had much luck finding them referenced anywhere prior to 2019, which is when Shout Factory released the DVD version of it that revealed it in its special features. But maybe I'm wrong. Regardless, while the Tylosaurus scene and the close-up shots of the Brontosaurus are shown in full, the close-up shots of the pterodactyl preening itself are still missing. In another kind of sort of case of lost media being found, this one being a documentary, I actually have an update on Dino Wars. In case you don't remember, Dino Wars was a brief entry on the last Lost Paleo Media video, and according to the only site that mentions it, the Lost Media Wiki, it was a Discovery Channel documentary that aired on November 5th, 2005, but the only thing that corroborates this is an alleged screenshot of the Discovery Channel schedule archives, which states, "Don't miss prehistoric programming on Saturday, November 5th and Sunday, November 6th, where it lists off all the programs that were set to air on these dates, including Iceman Cold Case Unsolved, Rise of Man, Before the Dinosaurs, and of course, Dino Wars. I almost didn't include the topic in my last video just because of the little information there was of it out there. It just felt like it was likely an example of fake lost media. But my curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to feature it anyway on the off chance that somebody knew something I didn't. And I'm glad I did, because it turns out there were quite a few of you that did recall watching this documentary back in the day, though with no clear memory of it, but the name seemed familiar. I ended up receiving a comment by a Henry Thomas, who managed to sort through the Internet Archive site and dig out an old TV schedule from the Discovery Channel, which was dated back to November 5th, 2005. And since YouTube is weird about link posting and comments, he would end up DMing me the link and I was able to see the schedule for myself. And it had everything here. together, Before the Dinosaurs and the Rise of Man, but Dino Wars is nowhere to be found. Instead, you see a show called Dinosaur Face-Off, with 2 episodes called Dinosaur vs. Triceratops and Velociraptor vs. Ankylosaurus. My immediate guess was that Dinosaur Face-Off was Dino Wars, and that these 2 titles were interchangeable for the same program and at different points were probably referred to one or the other. And when you consider Walking with Monsters also had the alternative title of Before the Dinosaurs, which also features on the initial screenshotted schedule, it's not too hard to believe this theory. So with this knowledge in mind, I decided to look into the Dinosaur Face-Off name, and I ended up running into a Dinopedia wiki page titled The Truth About Killer Dinosaurs, known as Dinosaur Face-Off. The Truth About Killer Dinosaurs was a 2-part mini-documentary made by the BBC. Its Dinosaur Face-Off name was an alternative title for when it aired in the US. The documentary features scientists combining modern tools and biomechanics to test out dinosaur strengths for different hypothetical combat situations. Both parts are an hour long, with the first one focusing on a Tyrannosaurus Rex versus Triceratops hypothetical, and the second episode focuses on a Velociraptor versus Ankylosaurus hypothetical as mentioned earlier in the episode titles. The original airing of the show was August 28th, 2005, about a couple of months before the November 5th airing. Even with all this information, there might be some people that are still skeptical about this being Dino Wars, but given the overall nature of the documentary and what it presents, I'd say all of the titles mentioned are all fitting for the subject matter, and thus, were likely just alternate titles from one another. Some might point out that the August premiere date for Truth About Killer Dinosaurs, and the November air date for Dinosaur Face-Off / Dino Wars provided in the archives don't align. But if you look back at the archived list, there are several other paleo documentaries that featured on November 5th, 2005 that were reruns, like Walking with Dinosaurs from 1999, Walking with Beasts from 2001, and Walking with Caveman from 2003. So it's safe to say The Truth About Killer Dinosaurs, which premiered a couple of months prior to this November schedule, was airing as a rerun for this prehistoric themed weekend of Discovery Channel documentaries. Oh yeah, the best part about all of this is that the documentary isn't lost. You can actually find it around the internet to watch for free. So there you have it. With all this evidence, I'm pretty convinced The Truth About Killer Dinosaurs is Dino Wars. That being said, like I mentioned earlier, there were several people who claim to have loosely remembered this documentary back when it aired in 2005, so I'm interested to hear from them to see if this was the documentary they sort of remembered. But again, I'm pretty convinced so far. While it's always nice to see examples of lost media being found, other examples aren't as lucky, like the lost documentary, The World's First Predator from 2002. This was actually suggested in one of the comments of my last Lost Paleo Media video, and just from the title, I would guess it's a documentary delving into the science behind the apex predators during the time before terrestrial life. Looking into it myself, I wasn't able to find much. The only thing that popped up was the special's IMDb page, which doesn't give out much information aside from smaller things like how the documentary features paleontologist Simon Brady, is narrated by Mark Hallilay, and is directed by Nick Young. Along with that, the site also states it was produced by a US and UK based TV company called Wall to Wall Media. I also ran into a Reddit post made by user Groundbreaking I10 who talks about this documentary a little bit more in depth. They state in their post, as a big paleontology geek, especially relating to the Paleozoic, and especially relating to invertebrates from that time, it's no surprise that I'm a massive paleo media fan, from well-done hour-long TV specials to sweeping projects like the Walking With trilogy. In my constant search for new stuff, I've heard several times of a TV special from around 2002-2003 called The World's First Predators, which includes, is stated in several places, as featuring Simon Brady, a paleontologist whose work I found fascinating ever since first finding out about it when I was a little kid, in the PBS National Geographic documentary series The Shape of Life. The overall subject of this special, the evolution of the earliest large predatory animals, is something that in general I just find incredibly fascinating regardless of who is involved. However, after years of searching, I haven't been able to find the documentary or anything else about it other than what's written on its IMDb page. There was also a DocuWiki page about it at one point, but unfortunately I can no longer locate that. So I'll assume I either misremembered it or it was deleted. It was apparently also also narrated by Mark Hallilay and directed by Nick Young. I can only assume if Brady was involved as a guest scientist that it included content on Eurypterids, and maybe something about early stem arthropods or burrowing worms/mollusks. But beyond that is just a blank everywhere I look. There doesn't seem to be a summary or review from it remaining. The post didn't gain too much traction, with only one response by a user named Domesticated Dunce, which, amazing name by the way, but in this response was a link that led to another post about the documentary, this time on a forum page called the Octopus News Magazine Online, where the poster, who simply goes by Phil, said this: "There was a fantastic hour-long documentary program transmitted on Channel 5 last Sunday, a fact almost worth reporting in itself given the dire quality of most of that channel's programming. The reason I am mentioning it is that it appeared to be a Discovery Channel documentary, and may well be repeated at some point in the future and is well worth keeping an eye out for. The program was called The World's First Predators, and was an examination of the origins of the chordates and how our phylum had been kept in check by the arthropods in the Cambrian and the nautiloids in the Ordovician. The program argued that chordates did not emerge as top predator until the extinction of the sea scorpions, and up until this point had been largely a prey animal. The argument was basically that creatures such as Piceia in the Cambrian had to adopt survival strategies such as burying in the silt in order to avoid becoming prey to the dinocarids. Thus, it is quite conceivable that vertebrates would not have evolved to become the arguably dominant creatures on the planet if the top predators had evolved slightly different hunting strategies. The program went on to depict a large unnamed orthocone nautiloid preying on a conodont, another fish-like animal with a primitive spine and almost certainly on the same lineage that led to us. The quality of the computer graphics was very good, not quite Walking with Dinosaurs, but nonetheless high quality. It was fantastic to see creatures such as Anomalocaris, Opabinia, Canadaspis, trilobites, nautiloids, and many others reconstructed in a living, believable ecosystem. The program did have a couple of faults. There were rather too many shots of a bald man staring at a snail and beetle on a table, don't ask, and a rather silly bit at the end where a computer mock-up was made of an evolved man-sized insect, but otherwise top-notch programming. I just wish I could show you all. And I forgot to mention it earlier, but this post was made back in 2003, indicating that that's when The World's First Predators was originally aired. Unfortunately, that seems to be the bulk of information regarding the documentary. Why it's never been re-released to the public is beyond me, but it's not uncommon for small documentary specials such as these to not get much of a release after their initial air date. Maybe the studio didn't think it was worth their time to do so, that it would cost them more money to distribute it in any other format than they would make back. Who knows? And while we're on the topic of Lost Paleo documentaries, I received a comment a little while back on my last Lost Paleo media video by a Michael Partham, who listed off several documentaries on prehistoric life that vary in how lost they are. Some are not so much lost, but rather are just exclusive to certain places and aren't widely available to the public. Others don't seem to have any kind of home release, physically or digitally, and there are some that are only partially lost. While I wasn't able to find a whole lot of information on most of these examples, I figured I could at least give them a mention just in case anyone else knew anything about them. In 1971, Horizon, a UK documentary TV series that covers a variety of science-related topics, released an episode called The Dinosaur Hunters. There doesn't seem to be any online platforms that features the episode, so unless it's out there somewhere in physical form, I guess it's safe to assume it's lost. There's a 30-minute 1987 documentary made by the Denver Museum of Natural History called The Search for the Thunder Lizards. According to the comment, the only existing copy of it is a VHS that's located at the University of Arizona Libraries. I tried looking into this to see what I can find, but there really doesn't seem to be any online reference of this documentary. Dinosaurs Messages in Stone from 1993 is a pretty standard paleo documentary with clips of dinosaurs intercut with talking heads and stock footage of dinosaur fossils and paleontology work. But one thing that makes it unique is that it was narrated by actor and comedian Leslie Nielsen. Also, this one isn't completely lost. I think out of the whole list on this guy's comment, this one is one of the more available examples, with a 38-minute rip of the documentary uploaded to YouTube, but the total duration of the episode was about 52 minutes long. According to WorldCat, there are a few places where Dinosaurs Messages in Stone is available, like the Toledo-Lucas County Public Library in Ohio, the Digital School Library that's also located in Ohio, and the Suffolk Cooperative Library System in Bellport, New York. Dinosaurs on Earth, Then and Now is a 1995 documentary made by the National Geographic Society. It was narrated by Pamela Conley and brings their dinosaurs to life through 2D animated drawings, along with featuring dinosaur animatronics made by the Dynamation Company. This one is also not widely available to people, as the only site that seems to have a copy is the Described and Captioned Media Program, which is a site meant to help provide educational materials to kids with disabilities. Paleo World, also known as Jurassica in Europe, is a 1994 documentary series about dinosaurs that's missing a few episodes. Most of the show seems to have been recovered between the VHS and DVD releases, but 2 episodes that a lot of people have pointed out as still lost come from season 4 of the series. More specifically, episode 5, Valley of the Venom, and episode 11, Troodon, Portrait of a Killer. There's a 2002 or 2009 documentary called Triassic Giant, focused on the discovery of a large ichthyosaur specimen dated to be from the Triassic period. The only piece of possible information I could find on this one was a TV guide listing with the description, examining excavation of a huge fossilized skeleton of an ichthyosaur from a remote riverside in northeastern British Columbia for the Royal Tyrrell Museum in Alberta. Included interviews with archaeologists. It also says the documentary is from 2002, so it's likely this is the same thing, but I can't be 100% certain. Sabretooth is a 2001 documentary focused on the hunting habits of the saber-toothed cat. It was produced by BBC Wild Vision, directed by Phil Fairclough, and aired on February 10th. This one is partially lost though, as the first half of it can be found on YouTube. Unfortunately, that seems to be the only part of it that's available now. And finally, there's Predator X from 2009, directed by Sid Bennett, the same man who directed The Dinosaur Project from 2012, along with a couple of episodes for Prehistoric Park from 2006. Technically, this one isn't completely lost, as it can be found in full on Dailymotion, but it's in French, so I guess the original English version of it is still lost, which is really weird to me. I could be misremembering, but back when I was a kid, my family and I would rent DVDs from our local movie rental store, and I remember I'd always go into the documentary section because that's where they had most of their dinosaur related stuff, and I feel like I remember renting the DVD version of this documentary. Again, I could be wrong. I rented a lot of documentaries from that store and watched a lot of programs on TV when I was younger. Most, if not all of it, was about prehistoric life, so maybe I'm confusing it with another program. I don't know, I swear I remember renting a DVD where the main focus was on Predator X. Again, I might be mistaken. Maybe I watched Predator X on TV and I just thought I rented it on DVD. Who knows? Hey, so quick update on Predator X. I'm pretty sure I just found a DVD of it being sold on eBay. And if I'm correct, this is the English version of the documentary, and I'm pretty sure it's the same one, as everything that's described on the description of the eBay listing corresponds with everything that's described in the Dailymotion upload. The only difference that I've seen is that on the eBay listing, it says that it was released in 2013, but Predator X was released in 2009. However, I'm positive that that 2013 date is just referencing the DVD release and not the actual program release date. So yeah, I'm pretty sure this one isn't lost. This was really interesting to go through. If there's any other examples of lost dinosaur documentaries, don't hesitate to suggest it down below. And while we're still talking about dinosaur documentaries, there's plenty of examples of supplementary content released alongside some of these programs and shows that are now completely lost or unavailable to the public. I'm mainly referring to some of the Flash games that were released alongside some of the Walking With specials from the early 2000s. Because the Walking With series proved to be popular, the BBC channel continued making all sorts of sequels and spin-offs for it, and would promote them through their site via Flash games. games. I've covered several examples of these kinds of games in previous videos, including the Big Al game to promote the Big Al Special, the Evolution game to promote Walking with Prehistoric Beasts, and the Sea Monsters Adventure game to promote the Sea Monster Special. Of course, these promotional games were always meant to just coincide with these TV releases, so when the popularity for the Walking With series eventually died down, the games were removed from BBC's website. This included two other examples that I learned about, one of them being called Battle of the Beasts, which was a 2002 Flash game that, like the Evolution game, was meant to promote Walking with Prehistoric Beasts. Despite the Walking With series being primarily educational, this Flash game had a more fictional element to it, as it was centered around creating hybrid prehistoric creatures using parts of animals that were in the Walking with Beasts program. And after creating your beast, you can use them to fight off other hybrid animals made by other players. The Flash game also had a mobile version of it as well, though based on what I've read on the archived page on the BBC website, the mobile version of the game doesn't seem to have any kind of hybrid element to it. Rather, it was just a text-based fighting game that allowed you to participate if you texted certain words to a specific number they provided. You do this by texting the word fight, followed by one of the 5 animals available as your opponent, which includes Gastornis, Megatherium, Basilosaurus, Andrewsarchus, and the European lion. Once you've selected your opponent, you follow it up by texting the 5 letters that correspond to the moves you want to make against them. For example, the letter B corresponds to the bite move, K corresponds to kick, D corresponds to dodging a bite, S corresponds to dodging a kick, and so on and so forth. And because each opponent had different strengths and weaknesses, there were actual strategies for countering their moves that were important to keep in mind if you wanted to win. What's cool is that the department that were running this game were keeping tabs on the player's progress, and every month would keep track of the top 10 players that they would put into a Hall of Fame. According to the site, the game was compatible with Vodafone and Cellnet customers, but it did cost money to play. Unfortunately, archives of the games themselves have been very poor. As far as the Flash game version of Battle of the Beasts go, there's only one surviving image of it, which is just a referee blowing on a whistle, signifying the start of a fight between 2 beasts. For the mobile version of the game, the only surviving image that's available is a screen with a text example on how to set up the message to participate in a fight with one of the animals. Eventually, both games were removed from their platforms just a few years later, sometime between 2004 and 2006, though their exact date is not 100% certain. Another example of a lost Walking with Flash game is the Caveman Challenge Game. There's really not a whole lot of information about this game outside of what's said about it on the site, but I would guess this was a Flash game meant to promote the Walking with Caveman miniseries from 2003. According to what it says on the site, find your place on our Caveman-o-meter by completing the 7 evolutionary challenges. Each challenge allows you to move along the evolutionary scale from ape to man, and the only visual evidence of its existence is a single still of one of the challenges, which is a matching minigame where you're supposed to match the tools to their uses. Aside from that, there's not much more information about the game. And that was yet another list of lost paleo media. As much as it sucks to see that a lot of this stuff hasn't been archived or saved, the topic of lost dinosaur related media will never not be interesting to me. I just really like learning about them, and if there's any more examples that you guys have of lost paleo media, do let me know down in the comments below. Who knows, they may end up in a future installment of this little lost media series I have going on. But as always, thank you all so much for watching. Thank you to my Patreon members for always supporting the channel. You guys are amazing, and it genuinely means a lot. That's pretty much all I have to say for now. Thank you guys so much for watching, and please, have a nice day.